Good day, everyone. This is Professor Randy Gallant. This is a presentation on inclusive education, issues, and understanding. What does it mean to have inclusive education here in Canada? Well, inclusive education means that all students attend and are welcomed by their neighborhood schools in age-appropriate regular classes and are supported to learn, contribute, and participate in all aspects of life in the school. Inclusive education is about ensuring access to quality education for all students by effectively meeting their diverse needs in a way that is responsible, accepting, respectful, and supportive. Students participate in the education program in a common learning environment with support to diminish and remove barriers and obstacles that may lead to exclusion. This information comes from the Inclusive Education Canada website. So, inclusive education in Canada, the idea is educate all students at the same age and grade level together in the same environment. That's basically what we're saying. Let's see what the Ontario government has to say about disabilities and students with disabilities. So special education students have behavioral, communicational, intellectual, physical, or multiple exceptionalities, may require special education programs and/or services to benefit fully from their school experience. Special education programs and services primarily consist of instruction and assessments that are different from those provided to the general student population. This next part is important, and I highlighted it in red because I'm going to be drawing attention to it again later. These may take on the form of accommodations such as specific teaching strategies, preferred seating, and assistive technology, and here's the important part, an additional program that is modified from the age-appropriate grade level expectations in a particular course or subject. And again, this was taken from the website for the Ontario Ministry of Education. So again, please pay attention to the highlighted red area. I'll read it again. An educational program that is modified from the age-appropriate grade level expectations in a particular course or subject. So that's kind of what we're looking for when it comes to a special education program, according to the government here in Ontario. So what does inclusion actually look like? Inclusion is a group of students at the same age, in the same classes, participating equally in the education that is being provided. So it doesn't matter if you are a student with disabilities. It doesn't matter if you are a minority student. Doesn't matter if you are a non-minority student. Everybody should be participating equally together in the same class. So in my research, I found this little video that really helped me out when figuring out what is inclusion.
I don't understand why I'm at the back of the class. I wish I was like everyone else. I want to do what they are doing. But here I am doing the same old number activity, watching as my classmates learn something else. Don't they know that they're setting me up to fail? Don't they know they hold my future in their hands? I want to work with my class, learn what they are learning, and do the activities they do. But here I am, stuck at the back, limited by low expectations. Having a one-on-one teacher aide just teaches me to rely on them and means I get less attention from the teacher. I am not included in the classroom. I am in the same room but segregated from my peers, sat to the side or back, working on different things and missing out. I want to be free to learn with my peers, reach my full potential and be seen to be like everyone else. I need something to change. You may be wondering what was wrong with this picture. I am in the classroom with my peers, sitting in my seat, learning the same things as everyone else. You may think this is inclusion, but it's not. I am stifled, limited, and held back from reaching my full potential. Though I love my teacher aide, I don't get to think for myself. In fact, a lot of the time my teacher aide does it for me, even whispering the answer in my ear when I already know it. The more she is with me, the more I realize that there is no point in me thinking for myself because she will give me the answer anyway. I'm sure there are other kids who also need her help. Does she need to be with me? Can't she help others? Surely if I need help, I can put my hand up and ask my teacher like my friends do. My friends and classmates want to help me, but by having someone right next to me, they can't. I need to learn from my peers, be able to do group work and be challenged. I want to be allowed to fail or succeed and learn from it. I need something to change. Can you find me in the crowd? Inclusion is more than just a word. It is a culture, a mindset, and an expectation that everyone can and will learn and succeed along their age-appropriate peers. I know it can be challenging to include me in the learning as sometimes I might require extra resources and information, but giving me space to learn from my teacher and peers is the best way to challenge me and allow me to grow. I want to learn the same things as my classmates, and I want teachers to have the same expectations of me as my friends. My learning may need to be modified, but I still want the opportunity to show what I can do, not focus on what I can't. Treat me the same as any other student and watch me flourish. I will rise to the challenge of expectations you set for me. Are you ready to really include me?
So that video was created by Down Syndrome Queensland in Australia, and I found that video very, very enlightening. It gave me an idea of really what the differences are between integration, perceived inclusion, and inclusion. So what does research actually say about the benefits of inclusion? So what are the benefits from an academic point of view? Students who are included can develop greater skills in reading and mathematics, have higher rates of attendance, less likely to have behavioral problems, and are more likely to complete secondary school than students who have not been included. What does the research say about students' social skills? Inclusion increased social interaction, so being part of the class. Improved self-care, independence. It increased a student's ability to communicate with others and improved their relationship building skills. What does research say about benefits to non-special education students? So this is very interesting. So having somebody with special needs or special education student in a class with the general population actually has benefits to the general population of students with very little to no issues. So the non-special education students build an understanding and respectful attitudes towards diversity. They learn about social abilities, and they have enhanced opportunities for academic learning when working with other learners and other types of learners. So in this case, special education students. So what are some issues with implementing inclusion? Well, there's possible social isolation. So for students who are not able to participate fully in a classroom activity, might develop a feeling of being isolated because they cannot be involved with that particular activity. There's a negative stigma. Sometimes it's from other students in the class, sometimes it's from the school, sometimes it's from the teacher, kind of looking down upon students with special needs. Negative attitudes among some stakeholders. It is quite common for parents of non-special education students to look down on the presence of a special ed student in the class with their child. It gives that idea that the education for their child will be brought down to the level of a special ed. There's also a problem with the poor quality of instruction and the instruction design, so non-UDL, so universal design learning. So those principles not being adapted. Untrained teachers in inclusive classrooms. This is a big one as well, especially with the older teachers in the classrooms, that old school mentality. Lack of resources available. This is one of the complaints that we hear all the time from teachers of special ed students, saying that they don't have the resources available to completely include those students and have them successful. And again, in highlight in red, lack of individualized, specialized learning and attention. So this is a point that I'm going to bring up again. It's kind of the focus of what's going on in this presentation. So in a regular stream classroom, do special ed students get the attention and specialized learning they require and deserve to be successful in that program? So I want you to take a second and think about what inclusion looks like in your school. And when doing this, I want you to ask yourself these following questions. Is everyone included? Is it inclusion or is it integration? Are the students that are included struggling? Are the students getting the specific help that they need? And the important one again, is inclusion the best option for everyone? So regardless of the disability, is inclusion the best option for everybody? So, comes to my big issue. The question is full inclusion the best option for every student? We always talk about how one size education doesn't fit everybody. So we look at the actual education system and we say, okay, does every student learn the same way? No, they do not. Is every student equally as good in all areas of education? No, they are not. I will pose the question that says, will every student be best served by inclusion? Or will some students be left behind because they do not receive the special lessons, the special focus, the special attention that they require? So, is full inclusion the best option for every student? I don't think so. So my full inclusion theory. Inclusive education is the best option for a large percentage of the population of students with disabilities. The question that comes from this is, what is that population? So if inclusive education is the best option for a large group of students, that doesn't mean it's the best for everybody. So what is the population that is best served by full inclusion? I suggest we focus on the IEP, so the Individualized Education Plan for a student with disabilities. If the IEP of a student has different learning outcomes than the rest of the regular stream class, is that inclusion or integration? So again, if the individualized education plan of a student with disabilities has different learning outcomes than the rest of the classroom, is that inclusion or integration? And I say that is integration. So here again is from the Ontario Ministry of Education that I highlighted earlier for special education program, an educational program that is modified from the age-appropriate grade level expectations in a particular course or subject. So again, if the learning outcomes are different, then that is special education. And I think, or my belief, is that becomes integration. So again, let's look at an example. The criteria that I use for full inclusion. If you have a classroom of students and one student with special needs is not at the same level as the other students. So in this picture, you can see that the student on the left is learning how to add fractions. The student on the right is learning how to count. So it's obvious that for this particular class, these two students have different learning outcomes. The student on the left, the outcomes are learning how to add fractions. The student on the right, learning how to count. So if every student in the classroom can function at the same level, then that would be great for full inclusion. The question is, but what if they don't? So what if we have students that are working at different levels? Are we best serving the student by putting them in a group where everybody else is working on something different? My solution. So how do we give students the benefits of inclusion plus the individual specific attention that they require and deserve? The answer for this is partial inclusion. So you might ask, what is partial inclusion? Partial inclusion is basically a term that's used to describe a scenario where a student with disabilities has different learning outcomes on their IEP. So again, we're focusing on their IEP and the learning outcomes. If those are different than the regular stream class, then this particular student could have or qualify or best served, if you will, in a partial inclusion environment. The benefits of being included in the regular stream class: for things that they can participate at the same class level. And then specialized in areas of their education where special attention is required. With some special ed students, sometimes the students just require a change in environment throughout the day. So an example would be a student on the autism spectrum disorder. So that particular student could get overwhelmed by all of the goings on in the class and need some quiet time. So that student could go to a quiet room for a little while just to get away from all of those things that are going on in the class that are just overwhelming for that particular student. So think of this as an inclusion integration combo. Let's take a look at what the research shows. Riffice of 2006, the special education teacher is able to take the student during portions of the day to work on specific needs with the student inside or outside of the classroom. The key advantage of partial inclusions makes including students with disabilities much more successful in a general education classroom. Why? Because in areas that the student is struggling, or when the student can't participate fully in an area of study, it gives the teacher or special ed teacher an opportunity to take that student aside for one-on-one, focused, individualized learning. Inguini and Sigachiva of 2016. Students with disabilities often prefer working in special programs designed for their needs, rather than an all-inclusive classroom. Some students with disabilities also feel that the special programs offer them more support in receiving a proper education. Students with disabilities, again, if they have different learning outcomes, so that means that they are somehow behind the class or unable to participate in the regular curriculum of that class, and they need special individualized help. Kurth et al. Of 2015, an activity was found to be unrelated to the general population activity when students worked on a task that was substantially different from the rest of the class, such as sorting shapes while the rest of the class participated in multiplication. They found that out of the special ed population, there was 20% of the population of special ed students in the school were not working on the same things that the rest of the class was working on. So their IEP would have different outcomes. So 20% of the population of special education students were working at a different level than the rest of the classroom. Bills and Mills, 2020. Several studies have demonstrated that children with Down syndrome who are involved in partially mainstream settings thrive better academically and social in comparison to students with Down syndrome who are not included in the mainstream. So again, the importance of bringing students with disabilities into what they call the mainstream, so that would be the regular stream classroom. But we still need to provide them with individualized, specialized learning if they cannot contribute or participate at the same level as the rest of the class. Hakama and al. Of 2021 talk about a students into school together class. So basically, a to school together class is a special education class where students with similar disabilities work on specialized tasks, and then as a group they are brought out and included in regular activities in the regular classroom when they can participate. So this is a different model. So instead of having an inclusive class where students with disabilities are removed from the class for specialized learning, these students start off with a special class with focused individualized learning, and then they are brought into the regular class for activities. Kurth et al. In 2015. Some of the schools use teaching arrangements that involving students moving to other locations outside the general education setting for specialized services. So this is another thing that kind of focuses in on partial inclusion. So sometimes students require things like physiotherapy, speech pathology, a quiet room. So in my theory, when students cannot participate fully in the activities of the regular class, give them an opportunity to take that time and get individualized services that they need for education, for their health, for their socialization. it's very important to make sure that students in the school setting can actually get the services they require to become successful. So let's take a look at a few inclusion case studies. So the goal of these case studies is to determine whether or not full or partial inclusion would be best for that particular student and why. Let's look at case study number 1. Tom is a grade 3 student registered as a student with disabilities. He has a hearing impairment. Tom has an IEP listing accommodations and assistive technologies. Tom is at the same academic level as others in grade 3. And with the help of his accommodations and assistive technologies, he's able to participate fully in the grade 3 class and learn at that grade 3 level. In a case like this, Tom is a candidate for full inclusion, where he can benefit from the opportunities to learn and socialize with others of his particular age group. So according to the research from that study, Tom makes up 80% of the population of students with disabilities. So 80% of the population, students with disabilities, qualify or are candidate for full inclusion. So let's take a look at another case study. Let's take a look at case study number 2. Cindy is a grade 5 student registered as a student with disabilities. She has mild cerebral palsy and requires a wheelchair for her mobility. She has issues with fine motor control and uses assistive technologies. Cindy has no cognitive disabilities. She is at the same academic level as others in grade 5. Cindy's IEP shows different outcomes for any form of physical education or physical activities. In a case like this, Cindy is a candidate for partial inclusion. Cindy can participate academically with the rest of her class using the assistive technologies that she has. But during physical education, Cindy is unable to participate equally with the rest of the class, and she could feel isolated or inferior. So an example, everybody remembers what gym class looked like back in grade 5. So back in grade 5, you were doing things like playing basketball, learning gymnastics, volleyball. In my school, we played dodgeball. Those are activities that Cindy cannot participate in fully. So in volleyball, she cannot participate. She cannot do the motions when playing volleyball. She can't hit the ball. It becomes dangerous if the ball is hit towards her. So what are you going to do? Are you going to set Cindy at the back of the room and have her watch the rest of her class play volleyball? I suggest that during this physical education time, Cindy is removed from the class and spends some time in a special education activity room where she can work with a physiotherapist, an occupational therapist, a speech pathologist if she requires, and work on some specific things that Cindy needs. So let's say the physical therapist can work on exercising things that target Cindy's motor skills. If Cindy has a speech impediment, she can work with a speech pathologist at that time. It is a better use of Cindy's time at school than not be able to participate with her class. Some of the theories of inclusion will say, well, then the rest of the class should be doing activities that Cindy can participate in. I don't believe that the rest of the students should be deprived of learning how to play basketball or learning gymnastics. So what we want to do is we want to have the best learning experience for every student. And in this case, I believe having a specialized time with Cindy while the rest of her class is learning how to play volleyball, Cindy is working on her fine motor skills. Case study number 3. Fatima is a grade 4 student registered as a student with disabilities. She has a dyslexia diagnosis. Fatima has troubles with reading and comprehension. Her IEP shows different outcomes for handwriting, reading, and comprehension. Fatima is a candidate for partial inclusion. During reading and writing class activities, Fatima is unable to participate fully at the level of the rest of the class. This causes the teacher to avoid calling on her to read out loud. Fatima could feel isolated, anxious, and inferior. During reading time, I believe she should be working separately with special education teacher on specialized techniques to help overcome or minimize the effects of her dyslexia. How is a student with dyslexia supposed to overcome the limitations if it's never focused on? Again, inclusive education will say, well, the rest of the class should participate in those techniques. I don't think that focusing a whole class on specialized techniques to overcome dyslexia is the best use of time for the whole class. So, Fatima, with the help of a special ed teacher, should be using that time to focus on techniques for dyslexia. But during the rest of the day, Fatima can participate in the regular stream activities and socialize with the rest of her peers. That is what is good about the partial inclusion. Giving Fatima the specialized care that she needs, and the rest of the day spend with activities in the regular stream with her class. Case study number 4. Malachi is a grade 3 student registered as a student with disabilities. He has been diagnosed with Down syndrome and is intellectually delayed. His IEP shows different outcomes for math, reading, writing, and comprehension. Malachi has no physical restrictions other than being slower and less coordinated than the rest of the student population. Malachi is a candidate for partial inclusion. During reading, writing, and math activities, Malachi is unable to participate fully at the level of the rest of the class. The teacher is uncomfortable on calling on him, thinking Malachi could feel isolated and inferior because he doesn't know the answers or he's not working on the same material. During reading and writing and math time, he separately works with a special education teacher on specialized techniques to help him with basic literacy and math skills. A student like Malachi, I worry about getting left behind every single year. And not left behind as in failing a grade, but being left behind academically. They are already behind, and if they don't learn some basic literary and math skills, every year they get further and further behind. But during the rest of the day, Malachi participates in the regular stream activities. So he can do physical education, he can do art classes, anything that provides him with the socialization with the rest of the class. So, in a case like Malachi, good candidate for partial inclusion, gives him the specialized training, the specialized help to get him to a basic literacy and math level. And let's take a look at our last case study. Stevie is a grade 4 student registered with Students with Disabilities. He has been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. His IEP shows that he has difficulty with comprehension and social activities. Stevie has no physical restrictions. Again, Stevie is another case, so a candidate for partial inclusion. During periods of the day, Stevie is unable to focus and participate fully at the level of the rest of the class because he's overwhelmed by the classroom environment. Stevie could feel anxious and display behavioral problems if he's singled out. During the day, Stevie requires quiet time, so he separately works as a special education teacher in a different environment to keep him centered, focused, and calm. But during the rest of the day, Stevie can return to his class and participate in regular streams, gaining him the higher academics and some of the social skills that he requires with his peers. But when it becomes overwhelming for Stevie, again, he can actually leave with the special ed teacher and continue his studies in a quiet room where they can focus and keep Stevie calm. So 5 case studies. 1 case study, full inclusion. Why? Because that particular student does not have different learning outcomes in the IEP. The other 4 students, because of their disability, have different learning outcomes for particular areas in a class environment. They are candidates for partial inclusion. So in conclusion, inclusive education shows that it has benefits in both academics and social skills for students with disabilities. Every student is different, has different abilities and disabilities, so every student should not fit into the same mold when it comes to full inclusion. So what you need to do is examine the IEP to decide if full inclusion is right for a particular student. For those students who have different learning outcomes in their IEP, full inclusion is not the best answer for those students. So I ask the question, what is the best answer? Best answer is partial inclusion. Again, partial inclusion. Student receives the social benefits of inclusion with the additional focus on academic learning, physical therapy, or mental health, all of which is best delivered in an individualized, student-centered environment. Focusing on what is best for the education and advancement for those students. I'd like to thank you very much for your time. Again, this is Professor Randy Gallant, and this was a presentation on inclusive education.